The AmeriCorps Vista volunteer at NTAP. And well, this is a little bit about me. This is my second AmeriCorps term. My last one was with an emergency response team based in St. Louis. And I responded to 2 disasters in southern Missouri and found out that I really love disasters, as weird as that sounds, I guess, and wanted to kind of continue that interest, that work here. So that's kind of what brought me to research this, and so I hope it's something that's useful and interesting to everyone here. So we also have a couple of actual experts here with us today, just to introduce them. We have David Nguyen, who's the director of the ABA Young Lawyers Division Disaster Legal Services Program, so he's available if you have questions for him. Also, Cynthia Gibson. I haven't heard from her. I think she's on the call. Speak up if you can, or anyway, she's the managing attorney of the Georgia Legal Services office in Dalton, Georgia. I also saw we have William Guyton on the call, who's in Alabama. So they've done a lot of work with so I guess that's it for introductions. And then moving on, I just wanted to go through a couple of key terms. Just from reading the literature, there's a lot of jargon, and I just wanted to run through some basics really fast, hopefully, just so we're kind of all on the same page with talking about this. So first, and really basically, a disaster is just something that effectively stops you from doing your work. It can be something small like a computer crash or your electricity goes out. I even saw someone going on vacation defined as a disaster in one place. It can also be something large, what you would think of as a tornado or a flood. That's different from a crisis. Just I saw that somewhere and I thought it was kind of interesting to differentiate. Just something that's detrimental to your profitability, reputation, functioning. It's just kind of like a broader and a little bit different definition. And then getting into disaster response is that immediate period following some kind of disaster. Pretty much you're trying to minimize damage, provide basic services, stuff like sheltering, providing food, providing clothing, search and rescue if it's necessary, just basically that really short immediate period after a disaster. And then you get into disaster recovery and business continuity, and I've seen kind of flip-flopping definitions for these two, but basically how I defined it, and if someone has a better definition, please go for it, but I've defined disaster recovery as kind of restoring functioning and providing services again, whereas business continuity is more of like the background, getting your organization financially back on track, physically back into your building, that kind of thing. And then some big pieces of a disaster plan, if your organization has or develops one. An impact analysis is basically just looking at everything that can go wrong and how you would deal with it. So that's kind of the backbone of your plan. And then a consortium or reciprocal agreement is with other organizations, an agreement that you would share facilities and or resources if something happens, and a mutual aid agreement is more with government or emergency responders, that like this is what we'll need if something happens, and it helps them to send you resources or people or equipment or whatever you need more accurately and faster, so that can be a really big help too. So I hope that was fast but not too fast. I wanted to start us off with a poll just to kind of see where everyone's at. Unfortunately, Join Me doesn't have that feature built in, so I was just going to send this out as a SurveyMonkey in the chat. If y'all don't mind jumping on, it's just those 2 questions that are listed on this slide, just to kind of see where everyone is and kind of get the ball rolling. So I'll give you a couple minutes, and I'll just kind of hang out on that key terms slide while we're doing that. Okay, I'll bring this over, y'all can see it. Grab this one. Got, it looks like 9 responses in so far. Yeah, and those are, okay. Looks like we've got a lot of people just want to learn the basics. That's out of 9. And then we've got a pretty wide variety with what people have already. It looks like a lot have a backup or data recovery plan. Okay, and then a recovery plan, a lot that don't have a disaster plan yet. Okay. Yeah, at this point I just kind of wanted to turn it over to discussion, so if anyone has a burning question that they want to throw out there, or anything they want to start off with, anything you're noticing from this, or just go for it. Anybody? And if you don't have audio, you can type something in the chat too. So, okay, if we don't have any burning questions, could we maybe just have David or Cynthia or William talk a little bit about their experience? And maybe, David, you could talk a little bit about what DLS does?
Sure, Liz. Disaster Legal Services, yeah. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, I think so.
Disaster Legal program that brings together the American Bar Association and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It's a program that's been going on since the 1970s, and every time a federal disaster is declared, FEMA goes in to make an assessment whether or not individual assistance is required. Remember that there are many disasters where individual assistance isn't initiated, where it's only public assistance when it comes to infrastructure, roads and bridges, that sort. So disaster legal services comes in when a vast number of individuals in the population is affected by the disaster. And basically, the way the program works is when is initiated, we work with the local bar associations or legal aid organizations to set up a pro bono legal hotline. Volunteers in the area, volunteer attorneys in the area sign up to assist and take calls to, we set up a pro bono legal hotline. Most of the time it's with the Bar Association in conjunction with the legal aid organization in the area. And we've got a number of volunteers, and more volunteers are encouraged to sign up with either their bar associations or with us, and we work with the bar associations and the legal aid organizations. I think we see that most of the time our calls, especially in the first couple of months after disaster hits, deals with three major things. First of all, it is with landlord-tenant issues. Mm-hmm. Secondly, insurance claims. And third, FEMA assistance and benefits and appeals. And so usually those are the three big things in the first several months. And then later on, things in those areas get a little bit more complex. Sometimes we also do see cases pertaining to family law, bankruptcy, some business issues, and those are fewer and far between. But we still see those issues, especially when, I don't know if anybody is on the line from Louisiana, but we have issues where when Katrina hit, it hit over the weekend, and so that's usually the period of time where mom and dads are exchanging custody of children, and because of the disaster, communication lines were down. Folks sought shelter and things like that. Nobody really knew, who had custody, where their child was, that sort of a thing. But so, briefly, that's what Disaster Legal Services does. We kind of bring everybody together at the table to really provide immediate legal assistance when FEMA is present in a disaster. Recently, we've seen, especially with Sandy and Isaac down in Louisiana, we've had attorneys who have set up a shop meaning pro bono attorneys, by the way, set up shop in our disaster recovery centers. And that's been really successful. So in New York, we've got the New York Legal Aid, as well as City Bar, who are working in the disaster recovery centers serving our survivors there. And then we have Legal Services of New Jersey, as well as Volunteer Lawyers for Justice of New Jersey, doing the same kind of work in New Jersey. And so we want to be able to engage our LSC grantees in that manner. I guess I'll leave it for somebody else to chime in, since I know our time is short. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to let me know.
Sure. So in the wake of a disaster, DLS would get in touch with legal aids or bar associations in the area. Is that right?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay.
And each state has a young lawyer who serves on our leadership council, and they go through a yearly training when it comes to disaster legal services, how to implement the program. They understand what FEMA does, they understand what we do, and they reach out to folks in the area. And so, yeah, that's how that works.
Okay. Great.
So how prepared are organizations that you end up dealing with when an actual disaster comes around?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that really does range. So when we work in, for example, states that see disasters frequently, organizations are prepared. So Louisiana, for example, Florida, Texas, those states where they've seen a lot of this and have done it often. For example, in New Jersey, it was quite difficult. I mean, I wouldn't say difficult, but it was took a little bit longer of a process to get up and going because they weren't as prepared. They had to obviously get themselves up and going and get their infrastructure up before they could then reach out and assist the community. So again, I think it's very it varies. For example, last December we actually met with the folks in Southern California, and so when we talk about being prepared, that's kind of why we were out in Southern California. Is I think it's inevitable. Actually, it was just last week there was an earthquake. I guess a 5.5 earthquake in Southern California. So we met with them and are looking at putting together a simulation to try to get the folks on the ground thinking about it, to practice it, and so that when something like that happens, they kind of know what to do and where to go.
So,
if anybody's on the call, go ahead.
So if you've got an organization that really has, they've got a little bit of backup procedure in place for their data, what's the next step that they really need to look at in putting together a recovery plan? I mean, where is their time best spent?
Yeah, I also sit on the special committee, and I guess the ABA Special Committee on Disaster Response and Preparedness. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can, in the chat view, put the website in there, because there are a lot of resources pertaining to that for organizations and bar associations. And I guess a brief, quick, if you've got the storage data, I guess the next step would be to think about where, can you access that data elsewhere, remotely? First of all, access it remotely. Where would you set up if your organization was affected by the disaster? To think about making sure that I guess all the data was backed up. A lot of times organizations, you've got stuff that isn't backed up, and making sure that you can somehow have access to contacts and things like that. But I think that the website that I'm going to give you will give you a better sense and a better direction. There are sample disaster plans that are on that website for bar associations and organizations to adopt and to look at,
Great. We should be able to get that up here on the Join Me screen also.
Oh, great.
So
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, let
just
me
put it
see
into
if
the
I can-
type or the chat, and we'll head over to
Is
it.
that-
That'd be great.
Is that the disaster legal aid?
No, it is the Special
Site? Okay.
Committee on Disasters Response and Preparedness. Let's see.
Okay.
It is. Let me put that in here. These websites have the longest.
URL, yeah.
We're,
Yeah.
in law, we love our acronyms and our long website names.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think.
All right.
Excellent. It looks like that came through the American Bar site.
It's actually a disaster, not disasters. So take the S off
Okay.
of disasters. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Got it. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so if you can see there, yeah, you got the Lawyer's Guide to Disaster Planning, and if you go, I believe, into resources,
Okay. Is it over here? Okay.
you have different resources and different groups here. And so under resources for state bar and organizations, we have the toolkit, and there are different state disaster response plans.
Okay. Is that
So this is a great
You're doing
place
it right.
to see some of the plans that have been put in place. I mean, any of those
Yeah.
that you would recommend as being particularly good or worth looking at?
I know the Tennessee bar is really good,
okay?
and I haven't taken a look. Oklahoma, I've heard, is good. The three states that we have up here
Mm-hmm.
are all good, you know, because we
Sure.
Because you're
go
highlighting them.
through and
You
yeah,
have
yeah,
reviewed
exactly.
the right.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Okay.
What could I also recommend that you do is that with the City Bar of New York, let's see if I can find the link. The City Bar of New York came up with a pretty good disaster handbook for survivors. So let's see if I can find it. I think here it is.
The corrected one.
Excellent. That now shows up as a clickable link in the chat.
Yeah.
So here is, this is a good handbook where it looks like Morrison and Forrester, a firm in New York, put together as different legal issues. Now remember that it is only for New York, but at least hopefully it gives a good idea for other folks. And since I'm using the iPad, I can't cut and paste.
Sure.
Let's see. So there we go. I think that came in. See if that link works, and see if you can
Yeah.
pull that up for everyone. Surprised a law firm would actually have the domain name of www.mofo.com, but
I'm sure it has great SEO.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is going to take a minute, it looks like.
So there was a question about emailing the links afterwards. We should be able to go through and add those to a blog post. So that
Okay.
everybody
Yeah,
has
we don't have
access.
everyone's email address since you didn't register ahead of time.
But
yeah,
what we will
can
do is we'll send it out
post
to
a
the
follow-up.
LS Tech list and add it to our blog.
Yep, I'll do that. Okay. I think I saw a different one that Legal Services NYC put together. It looked different than this one.
yeah, that could also be another
Yeah.
one.
Okay. Well, let me just remind everybody you're free to ask questions at any time. If no one's asking questions, I think I would just move on the more preparedness side. Maybe Cynthia Gibson, if you're on the call, or William Guyton, I saw you were on, if you want to talk at all about what's in your organization's disaster plan, or anybody else who feels like they have a good one that they want to share, what they have included and what they think is worth having. You know, I mean, obviously there's a lot you can plan ahead for, but what pieces do you have in your disaster plan for your organization?
This is Cynthia Gibson.
Hi.
I just joined a few minutes ago, so I
Great.
missed the beginning of the call. Our organization has a disaster plan.
Could you speak up a little bit?
I'm sorry, I'm with Georgia Legal Services.
Mm-hmm.
And we do
You all have
access.
Oh, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
The organization does have the disaster plan, but my understanding is we had a disaster in my area a couple years ago, and it didn't involve the program, but it was in our service area. And so that's what I thought I was on the call for. I don't really know that much about our organization's plan, and we've never used it, so how well it would work I couldn't talk about.
Okay. Sure. Well, can you talk about what your experience was with that then a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I actually lived in the area. It was a tornado where the tornado hit, and the biggest thing. I mean, we participated with FEMA at where they set up in the counties, and that didn't really seem to be that good of a use of our time. But it was really just sort of being a database to help distribute information as to what was available and what people could do and what benefits they could get to help people immediately.
Right.
It was just sort of being a clearinghouse and helping to distribute information to the affected areas.
Okay. Great. Great. Yep. William, do you have anything you want to add on that if you have audio at this point?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Okay. Mine's much more practical because my section of the disaster recovery plan and business continuity plan really has to do with standing services back up post-disaster. And just about any state in the Southeast is as we all know, is very much prone to tornadoes and hurricanes. So our plan leverages the fact that we're a statewide program, that we've got connectivity from the north of the state up in Huntsville near the Tennessee line, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico and Mobile. And our plan basically revolves around our ability to restore and stand up services at any one of our 9 offices statewide. So when Katrina hit, we lost our Mobile office, but we failed over to our Montgomery and our Birmingham locations. When the tornadoes hit and took out Tuscaloosa, we did the same thing. We failed from west to east or from north to south. So we're assuming because of the geography of the state and the size of the state that we're going to have connectivity to one of our offices in the state in order to stand up our services and reroute our call traffic. Now, we can do that as a statewide program because we plan to do that as a statewide program. So we've got a unified phone system statewide, so we just route calls around where the disaster is, and we have the capacity to restore not only the data, but the servers that are required to serve that data up when we have a disaster. And part of that planning and part of that argument that I made to the executive team that I'm on is really a thought process by which you go to your lawyers and say, how long can we afford? You can do a thought experiment and say, how long can the organization afford to have no access to the case management data? Yeah. And when you start talking to your staff about how quickly you'd like to stand those assets back up so they can look at their court schedules, so they can get to their case management systems, so they can get to their email, whatever your core business services are. Obviously, you have to define those, but you really have to think about what they are and what you can really minimize and get away with when you have a disaster.
Right.
And the speed with which you spin those services back up really determines the cost. Generally, the faster you want to spin a service back up and make that data available to staff, the more expensive it's going to be to do. So you have to weigh how much downtime your organization can tolerate versus the cost of what it takes to restore a full set or a subset of services.
Okay.
So, William, what do you do as far as testing the system that you have in place? Is there, is that done annually, or how does that happen?
How is that updated or trained for staff? Or yeah.
Yeah, well, we do test restores quarterly,
Okay.
and it's very the system we're using is called Replay. It's from a company called Aperture, which I think Dell just bought, so it's now Dell Aperture, and they're currently up to Replay version 5. We're still on Replay version 4, but it's essentially designed to the way we've got it set up is we've got a primary backup in our primary data facility in Montgomery, and there's an agent that sits on each server and takes a snapshot of not only the data that you've defined, but also the virtual machine that the server's running on. Because that's one of the things we learned in Katrina was, having the data is wonderful, but if you have nowhere to restore that data and spin a server backup, it really doesn't do you any good. You really need to back up the data, and you need to back up the server that the data is running on. Because a lot of times what you forget is some special configuration that you stood up 5 years ago, and in a disaster you don't remember what that is generally. And it's generally not very well documented. But so the Aperture product, the Replay product from Aperture, allows you to restore a virtual machine. So that's the entire server state and the data state at the time that the backup was done. So you can restore it. You don't have to. The beauty of restoring a virtual machine is you don't have to have the same physical hardware to do the restore.
Right.
You can restore it to any VM that you want to. And in fact, Aperture restores to all the VMs, whether they're Linux-based or Windows-based or Citrix-based. So that increases your ability to go find some hardware, find some power, and do a restore to dissimilar hardware. But basically, we do snapshots every 15 minutes. There's a deduplication function, so we don't back up duplicate data that people may have thrown up on a file share. Mm-hmm. And then our failover site's in the Birmingham office. So every 15 minutes it replicates to the Birmingham location. So we get two sets of that data in two different major metropolitan centers that are about 100 miles apart in the center of the state.
So James had a question here, which was, does it restore to a device or restore to a different server? And from what you were saying, it seems to be that it can restore to pretty much any server, right?
Well, it's a virtual machine snapshot, so you can restore it to any hypervisor that you can spin up. So you get the ability to, it doesn't care that you were running on Hyper-V initially and you had to restore to VMware, or it doesn't care that you were running Zen and you restored to Hyper-V. The Aperture, the Replay software takes care of that complexity.
Okay.
So it maximizes, it increases significantly your hardware choices, because in a disaster, the types of hardware you may have to restore to are going to vary wildly depending on where you're restoring from and where you're restoring to. That's one of the benefits of running in a virtualized environment and doing your backups and your restores within that same virtual environment.
Okay, so two more questions here. And just to let people know, I threw the link to Aperture in the chat. We'll add that into the blog post later also. What other solutions did you consider, and what was really your decision reason for going for Aperture?
Well, again, you have to have that conversation with your organization which is the mission critical question I think you need to ask your organization is how quickly do you want to stand these services back up? How long can, and you can ask the inverse question, how long can we afford to be down as an organization? You know, when court dates are still coming around and clients are still being evicted, you know, you have to get the organization leadership to define that number. Because that number is going to define how you do your DRBC, how you do your disaster recovery business continuity plan. If your organization has decided that you can't be down more than 36 hours or 3 business days, then you have to design around that business requirement, and that's an expensive proposition. If you can afford to be down a week, then you can just back up your data off-site and drive your car and pick up a CD or an external hard drive and spin that data back up. So we determined, as a statewide organization, we determined that we wanted to spin data back up and spin services back up as quickly as we could afford to. And Aperture was the best of all the solutions we looked at. Because we looked at offsite backup, we looked at third-party backup, and we really wanted to leverage the wide area network that we built out, which interconnected all the offices statewide. And we knew that we were going to go ahead and do a big virtualization project, which really benefited our disaster recovery business continuity planning, because that defined how we did backups and how we did replication. So it's tremendously dependent on, you know, the size of your organization, the kind of budget you have, what your business requirements are from a business continuity perspective, and all those things play into how complex it's going to be, or how simple it's going to be, or how expensive it's going to be, or how inexpensive it's going to be.
Okay.
Excellent, thanks.
Yeah. What about, I'm just curious, did you talk at all with other local stakeholders? So did you share the plan with, like, the fire department in your area, or any kind of disaster responders, or anybody outside of the organization? Just wondering if that was a process.
I think the disaster manual that we worked on has been shared pretty widely. I don't know if there's a DRBC section in the disaster recovery manual that we helped write with a couple other programs in the Southeast. I think the disaster manual that I've seen really talks more about how lawyers respond to, you know, post-disaster, much like the Young Lawyers Program. I know we did some work with the Young Lawyers Program through the State Bar when Katrina hit, but the technical part of the DRBC program, I don't think we've shared with anybody.
Okay.
So is there anybody else here that would like to share what their disaster or data recovery looks like?
Or anyone just has questions about it too.
Right, because we've got a few other organizations on the phone here.
Mm-hmm.
This is Carlton Whitmore, Disability Rights Texas. And
Hi.
we actually, we've decided to replicate our data that we house here in Austin, Texas, to one of our offices in El Paso, which is actually on a separate power grid from the rest of the state. So I reserved one of the offices up there. We've set up a couple servers. We have a continuous replication from our SAN here in Austin that goes to El Paso, and that's basically how we have our disaster recovery set up. So Austin goes completely down. Our data is in El Paso, and the other part of that is, you know, the phone service. The phone service goes down because we have a lot of our call flows go through Austin. So we have our provider, which is TW Telecom, to automatically route all of our calls to Dallas.
Okay.
So, and that's done
Nice.
through the telecom, and then do you have a separate?
Yeah, the provider. Right. If our phone service goes down here in Austin, it automatically sends all the calls to Dallas, which is our provider is TW Telecom, so they handle all that part of it.
See, this is interesting to me because we just got done writing we just wrote a letter of intent on updating our somewhat ancient phone system. So do you have a separate PBX at that second location?
We have a PBX at all of our major sites. So we have 7 Avaya IPO phone systems. One is here in Austin, then we have one in each regional office. But we have our 800 number that people call in for initial intake. All the call routing is done through here in Austin. So if we were to go down, it would cause a big hassle for us as far as routing calls. So we just left it up to the provider to forward those calls to Dallas. And then they can actually manually route the calls from there to the intake staff.
Yeah, we're doing the same thing in Alabama, and it's basically try this number first. If it doesn't answer, reroute it to another location. We've got similar failover routing with our provider, which is Earthline.
So do either of you have a call center that does advice as part of the services you offer, like a hotline?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have an 800 line, and not all the people are here in Austin to answer that line. They're all over the state. So the 800 line comes to here in Austin, and then the call is sent to a hunt group, and then whoever's available basically answers the call. And it might be here in Austin, it might be somebody in Lubbock, it might be somebody in San Antonio.
And what software-wise, what are you using for that, or to manage that call center?
That's part of the Avaya phone system.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and we're using Asterisk statewide. Our primary queue is in Montgomery, but we have an attorney and an intake screener in Birmingham. We also have an intake screener in Huntsville. So if we lose Montgomery, we just do that failover routing and continue to take calls.
And to access things like the call queue, do they have to have access to a primary server, or is it a web-based app, or how exactly does that work?
For us, if they're in the office, they pick up their physical VoIP phone, their IP phone on their desk, and dial a 4-digit extension to drop into the queue. If they're off-site, if they're off WAN at some other location, there's a soft phone and a USB headset that we use, and they do the exact same thing.
Okay, so it's a client piece of software on their computer and just use a soft phone through the computer?
Right.
Excellent. Sorry to get off the phone tangent, just meetings for the last 2 weeks, and that's incredibly interesting all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Other questions or things that people have that they're curious about?
While everyone's thinking, I'll just throw up here. I found the manual that I'd found from Legal Services NYC about Sandy. A lot of it has to do with helping people get disaster-related benefits. And it's pretty long, but I'll just throw it up there and pull it up here so you can see it in case that would be useful to anyone. It's New York specific, but it's, some of it's federal benefits and stuff. So there it is. And there's a link in the chat if you're interested.
So it seems like a lot of that particular report could be taken and used by another organization to customize it to their state. Keep the federal things the same, and then replace the state resources with their local state resources.
Exactly. So there's some step-by-steps and that kind of thing in here.
So there was
we also... Oh, I was going to go with the question. You go ahead.
Go for it.
Okay, we got another question from James in the chat about William's back system. Do you have matching servers in multiple locations, or is that the downtime? Getting a new server for the secondary location. I'm not sure if
in our backup location, which is the Birmingham office, there are 3 Hyper-V that allow us to restore to Birmingham, either from Montgomery or from Birmingham. So Montgomery's the primary data facility. That's the primary backup, and then we replicate them. And there are, I believe it's 3 rack-mounted servers running Hyper-V just for restore purposes.
So are those just idle servers waiting for recovery, basically?
Yes, but we refurbed those servers when we virtualized Montgomery. We had a full rack of equipment that basically went from 6 feet high to 3 feet high, and we just rehabbed the old servers with some new drives and some new controllers, and put them in the Birmingham office. They'll run until they burn out, and then we'll replace them.
Did you try and match performance, or are they just they're there for availability?
Yeah, we decided from a cost perspective not to match performance. It really is a disaster scenario. We're going to spin up the bare minimum of services that are required until we can get the primary data center back up. We didn't have the additional capacity and the extra money to match one-to-one.
Okay. Thank you.
Also, if there's anybody here with resources that they think would be worth us sharing, please feel free to put them in the chat or to email us later, and we'd be happy to add them to a future blog post or to the LSTAP website generally. I'm going to put an email address that should get to both Liz and I. Although both Liz and I's email address is also very easy to get to.
Yeah.
And one of the things you can consider, just as a side note, is with a lot of these third-party virtual machine backup and restore pieces of software, you can restore to the cloud. You can restore to AWS. You can restore to Google. You can restore to any virtual machine you can spin up. So if you can get to Rackspace, if you can get to Amazon, if you can get to Google, you don't necessarily have to do a restore locally and have hardware locally. We've been looking at the ability to restore in the cloud.
No, that's very interesting, especially from a cost perspective. If as a for an organization that may not have the extra servers sitting around.
Right. You don't pay for it until you use it.
Right.
Yeah.
In fact, Amazon Web Services has a free tier now that you can play with.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah, if you Google AWS and free tier, you'll see some Linux instances and some Windows Server instances that you can run for free.
Okay. Very cool.
I saw a post on LS Tech about somebody saying something about security as far as running servers from the cloud, or I don't remember exactly what the post was. I'm just wondering if anybody had any comments on what about the security of the cloud, and if you've had any issues with that. Like maybe HIPAA regulations.
Right, yeah, all of our servers here for NJP are local, so we haven't looked into it extremely closely. I do know that there are several organizations, though, that use Google Apps or other cloud-based services to at least supplement what they're doing. HIPAA is an interesting one because there's a requirement to disclose if data is lost, and if you're putting sensitive data into that, it seems like that might extend to disclosing it when that service provider does something. And HIPAA is a healthcare specific law, so legal aid organizations often don't run into it. But that's a very interesting issue. I had not considered HIPAA with regards to it. There was a link that was distributed that talked about a lot of the different opinions of using cloud-based services in different states. And all of them that I have read at this point have been very positive, as long as you're using an organization that has a security privacy policy that does protect the user's data and a history of doing that in some way. I would have to look more closely, but I have not seen an opinion yet that has went against using cloud-based services from reputable providers.
And most states have data breach notification laws as they relate to personally identifiable information, which is name, social security number, street address, that kind of thing. So we don't fall under HIPAA, but most of us fall under the state data breach notification laws.
Excellent point. We're getting near the end of the hour here. Anything else to wrap up here, Liz?
I just have the kind of exit poll kind of thing, since we don't have your email addresses from a registration. If you don't mind just doing that really quick right now, it's just 3 questions. And then I just wanted to remind everybody about our webinar a week from today, once again. And that's all I have.
Okay.
So,
could you put the
back
link back up for the survey on the screen?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yep. And the webinar next week is on 35 free web-based or 35 free tools, tech tools for organizations. Some of those are web-based, some of them are not. We will also take that along with pieces from this and put it up on our YouTube channel. Let me get that URL. And I will put the YouTube URL inside the chat here also for people. It is NTAP videos. Thank you so much, everybody who attended. Also, thank you for organizing this, Liz. Greatly appreciate it. Great topic.
Oh, yeah. Yep, I hope that was helpful. Thanks for attending, everyone.